Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of The Context. We have a fantastic show for you today. We're going to be talking about the new MCP Apps project, or an improvement to the MCP spec, and I think it's going to be an awesome discussion. We've got the founders of MCP-UI here and maintainers of MCP Apps. So we'll be getting a lot of really good information about where this came from and where it's going, and hopefully answer any questions you have about why MCP Apps is important and what it's going to be bringing to your MCPs and to MCP supporting clients. So looking forward to the conversation. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Anyone who's still trying to figure out their April plans or already on them, save the date. We are all scheduled and locked in for April 2nd through 3rd for the next MCP Dev Summit. It's going to be in New York City this time. The call for papers is going to open up on Thursday. So we're 2 days away. If you're starting work on that, get ready, get going. If you want to join us and present for London, we had about 130 submissions for about 30 slots. So make sure your talk is compelling and differentiated. And I really look forward to reviewing it. We've got a great program committee all set up that we'll be introducing on Thursday as well. So should be a lot of fun.
Just today, it was announced that MCP is moving to Linux Foundation. So I expect expect the attendance to this is going to be pretty big. So.
Yeah, the MCP to the Linux Foundation announcement is definitely going to be a big part of this. The MCP Dev Summit is also moving to the Linux Foundation. So all of this is moving over, and we will all be joining the LF and talking LF stuff when we're there, which is certainly a big, exciting piece of news. So with all of that in play, we've got some great episodes coming up of The Context. So today's special edition is all about MCP Apps and an update on MCP-UI. We also are going to have another session this week, which we'll talk. We're going to have Adam Jones from Anthropic joining us, and he's going to talk a little bit about this code execution code mode that a lot of people are building MCPs to consume. And then we'll be talking with the team at Main Matter, Paolo there, about building the MCP for Svelte, a tool we use here at OBOT a lot. And so really, we've got some great talks over just the next couple days. So if you're not already planning to join us, please be sure to join us. I will say the December 11th episode, we're going to be starting 30 minutes early, just as a reminder. So our normal 1 p.m. East Coast time will now be 12:30 East Coast time, or 9:30 here on the West Coast. So with all of that, we're going to be driving through this pretty quickly today. We'll try to keep it to 20 to 25 minutes, but I know from our last set of conversations with Ido and Liad, we tend to go long when we talk about MCP-UI because it's interesting and it really is sort of the direction that a lot of us who are building MCPs or managing MCPs are envisioning, which is about great user experiences. So with no further ado, I'd love to welcome Ido and Liad to the call. Guys, thank you for joining us. I know it's late in the evening in Tel Aviv, where you're based, but we're super excited to have you here. I know your titles are already out of date because these should be maintainers or co-maintainers of MCP Apps. So first of all, congratulations on the MCP Apps announcement last week. This is great news. I guess it's now been 2 weeks. This is really exciting news. It's a big thing, I think, for everyone in this community because it's going to eliminate a lot of risk of fragmentation and sort of align everyone around a common standard, just like MCP has, for how applications can push UI into clients. And so maybe if you want to give us just a high-level overview of how this all came about and what MCP apps even are for the audience.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Great to be on The Context again. Just maybe let Liad also introduce himself. But like if we really take like MCP apps announcement, and obviously it's super exciting. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks for having us again. It's really interesting because last time we were here in the context, we talked about MCP-UI, I think, for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and now we can talk 3 hours about the MCP apps. And yeah, it's really exciting because of what you said, because of the fragmentation that we're trying to avoid, like from the beginning. Obviously, chat apps or apps inside chats are going to be an interesting vector going forward, and we're very excited to have it standardized, and yeah, we'll give a look on.
Well, that's right, because actually, when we were here last time, you guys were talking about your other project, which was all about bringing docs into MCPs and the MCP you built. But at both of the two dev summits, I think we've given presentations on kind of where MCP-UI is and sort of its progress, and they've been super popular sessions. People are very interested in the topic, but I mean, things definitely got thrown into a little bit of chaos a few months ago when suddenly OpenAI was kind of implementing their own approach to how to solve this problem, and they were putting it right into ChatGPT. And I know for a lot of us, it was like, oh, wow, okay, we're going to have to start building like tools that can work with different front ends. And it's it's very discouraging and sounds very wasteful. And so obviously something happened between us seeing OpenAI, being excited about MCP-UI, then seeing what OpenAI was doing in ChatGPT, and there's a little bit of chaos in the world, and then suddenly MCP Apps is announced. So what happened, guys? Like, how did we get to the point where you guys all got to the table and agreed on something? Was there a little bit of story there? I mean, tell us the story of how this came about, because it's excellent news, but I'm sure as well.
I think kind of MCP-UI definitely did, both Liad and I did a lot of work on kind of advocating or championing this idea that UI is needed and necessary in apps and in chats, and definitely MCP is kind of the way to do that and the way to enable adoption from companies that so far didn't want to adopt MCP because they didn't want to give their data away without branding. And it was, I think Darren was probably one of the first adopters as well, and OBot, Nanobot obviously integrated it very quickly. And the fortunate thing was to have ChatGPT, which is by far the largest host, kind of adopt this approach. Obviously a different type of standard, but very similar in a lot of ways. But it kind of showed everyone that this isn't just an idea that's a nice point, POC. Especially after what we've seen in the last Dev Summit, where we gave a talk and there was also a keynote, and there were, I think, 3 other presentations all talking about MCP-UI, which was exciting. And I think once we saw that, then obviously everyone else kind of opened their eyes and said, we need to be in this. And that kind of brought the community, or the MCP committee, to kind of the realization that we need to pick this up a notch and make this a part of the standard.
Well, that's where I thought this was all heading. I left London. I would have bet my mortgage that we were going to see MCP-UI become a part of the spec effectively. But that's not exactly what happened. What exactly happened was we got introduced to a whole, like, we were heading in this direction, and then suddenly we get a little bit of a, in my opinion, great news, but we basically sort of shift, and MCP-UI seems to basically have merged with the direction that OpenAI was pushing inside of ChatGPT. So how did that come about? Did you guys start talking? I mean, I know Anthropic was involved. It seemed like OpenAI was involved. You guys were involved. Who orchestrated all of this? Who brought it together?
I'll just give like a zoom in on those days, because we were giving the MCP-UI talk in the Dev Summit, in the MCP Dev Summit in London, and we got amazing reviews. Like you said, like people were like very inspired, very impressed. We had a lot of people coming, hosts and providers wanting to adopt MCP-UI, and then we both left London for like trips, like family trips, and it was like 2 days afterwards, and then ChatGPT apps were released. I think it was like 3 days after the
so
we had
right away. Exactly.
The war room. I was in Austria. I was somewhere in England, and we had to be like quotes war room to think what we're doing with we didn't want to have like this iOS versus Android situation. Obviously, we work together with with all the parties, but it was really interesting times. You don't you wanna?
Yeah, no,
So I was
thank you.
curious. Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead, Darren.
No, I was curious as how did kind of how did Anthropic get involved in this, and does Anthropic have any interest from like kind of like the cloud side, or is it just Anthropic being kind of the owners of MCP? Like what was the Anthropic's kind of
I
participation?
just add that in the same summit, the same MCP Dev Summit, in the keynote, MCP-UI was mentioned as it's going to be the first extension to MCP. So it was really on like the final days of finalization of formalization. So Anthropic, like the MCP committee was there already.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was wondering. I mean, did Nick from the MCP community help you guys get in touch and connect with? Because I really felt like it was all happening inside of MCP, and then suddenly out on the periphery, you have this, ChatGPT app sort of pops up, and they do seem super similar, but totally different implementation, or at least enough different that you were going to have your Android and iOS kind of problem in place. So were they pretty receptive? Did they reach out to you guys? Is that where this started? Did you reach out to them? How did you make the connection? Because it's sometimes it's pretty impressive, right? You guys are two guys working mostly on your own, building this awesome thing that's getting momentum. And on the other hand, you have maybe the 2 of the 5 hottest companies in the world that are impossible to, there's so much going on. They're impossible to work with at times. They're always running around, and somehow you pull this off. I think it's incredibly impressive. And I'm just curious what drove it, or who drove it.
So I will say, about Nick and the great guys at OpenAI. So right after Apps SDK was announced, Nick immediately sent a message on Discord, the MCP-UI Discord, saying that obviously they want to be, like part of the standard, and they want to be open and like a closed garden. So that was like very exciting to hear, and I think we met like pretty soon afterwards. Then the link to Anthropic was actually unrelated. Like Liad said, we were also in contact with them, for the MCP committee before that. Maybe that's a good time to say that we were also the moderators of the UI community work group, like before it was, MCP Apps. So it just kind of naturally came from there, obviously, after we kind of proved that this is something real and not just a hobby.
So before OpenAI came around, because the MCP app, there's quite a few changes to, the approach and everything. Before the OpenAI and the Apps SDK was announced, were you guys already planning on doing kind of a major refactor of the approach, or it was pretty much, we'll put MCP-UI as an official extension? It's like, at what point did it kind of completely shift? Yeah.
So yeah, maybe 2 sentences about that. In parallel to the talks that we had about maybe trying to standardize the Apps SDK and MCP-UI together, we built adapters for MCP-UI apps to be able to render in ChatGPT. So because we always had this vision of build once, run everywhere. So even though we had the ChatGPT Apps SDK, we wanted MCP-UI apps to be compatible with that. We did a blitz of, I think, I don't know, 2 or 3 nights. We're trying to build these adapters and making.
My wife didn't like that. We were like in Forest of Dean, and I'm like working at 3 a.m. to push Apps SDK adapter.
Yeah, no, I mean, your guys' hard work paid off, because I tend to be very pessimistic or skeptical about these things, and so I'm amazed that OpenAI. I mean, you got to give credit to them. I kind of feel like they didn't have to adopt, they didn't have to adopt an open thing. They could have just kept it closed. They have a huge customer base. They could have just done their own thing. So one, it's amazing that they immediately went towards an open thing. But then I was amazed that how quickly you guys adapted, because they took a different approach. They took what I really liked about how the way this all panned out, and I thought it was really great. Whereas MCP-UI, you guys come out and very aspirational, like great ideas. We can just transform the web. So you try all these things. It's the very first stab at this, so things are a little bumpy and everything. But then OpenAI comes out with their apps SDK, which is extremely targeted. They're like, we already have 800 million customers. We care about security. We care about performance. They're like, we don't care about your great ideas. We need X, Y, and Z to work and be secure, right? So the very, very conservative approach. And then then when you look at MCP, I feel like the MCP community and the extensions, like they then kind of looked at it like, or, I don't know who kind of came up with these other ideas of like, how do we make it a lot more in line with the protocol? So it's like, I really like the idea of like this newer one where it's like, oh, we just use the existing transport, like we just simplified. So it's like kind of these three forces coming together that at the end of the day, I really, really like the end result, because it's like when ChatGPT, when Apps SDK came out, I looked at it and I'm like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Like it was very, very conservative, very just targeted towards one use case. But I'm like, but this makes sense. It's like, so I was like, oh crap, like I can see this taking off. And it's like, does that mean MCP-UI is dead? It's like, should I just completely switch to this? Because their approach, like, really made sense. So I kind of, got to hand it to you, but like just how quickly.
I think you know why they were in a war room, right?
Yeah,
that makes exact sense. Now,
well, I was not very encouraging when it came out. Like
no, that was like, F this. Like,
By the way, there are like 5 or 6 forces in play, not just 3, because you need to. I mean, if you think about it, you have Anthropic and OpenAI that are on the MCP committee, and the goal there is to have like one unified specs, an open spec. But then you have Anthropic, OpenAI, and every other company, which is also a company, and they have a product. So you have, like always, you have conflicting interests here. And actually, when we looked at Apps SDK, it had a lot of like good ideas, a lot of similar ideas. At first, they took the approach of having like these OpenAI namespaces, right? Because you have to do like .openai and OpenAI names. And that's obviously not. It's not something that can run in other hosts, right? You can't imagine any other host running applications that are written with OpenAI, like from the commercial side. So that really marked the importance of aligning on something that's at least generic, even if it's going to be supported in different flavors, but at least generic, so that every host can run. And yeah, those were like very stressful 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah,
it was like an emotional roller coaster. That's what you do when you're building a spec. It's like the chicken and egg. You depend on all the parts to adopt it. Obviously it was a happy ending, but it didn't have to end like that.
So let's talk about that ending and where this went. So help me understand, as the least technical person here. I was super, had gotten myself pretty well educated on MCP-UI and what I could do with it, and was very excited. Where does MCP Apps take us? How is it different? What does it do that? What does it bring to the table that MCP-UI didn't have? What does it sort of remove? Like, talk to me about the difference, and where's it at? Like, MCP-UI was a usable piece of technology that was ready to go and could be consumed. Is MCP Apps ready to be consumed right now as well? What's the current state of the tech?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think MCP Apps at the moment is in draft mode. So we did like put out together with Anthropic and OpenAI this kind of initial spec. We already had a lot of feedback from the community. Things are still changing. There's already an official Apps SDK. Actually, maybe I can just share the blog post, just so we're on the same page. But definitely the idea there is that it will be like a gradual transition. So if we have the blog post from MCP.
You want to bump that up a little bit? It's a little small on the screen. Just make it a little larger with your, there we go.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So you can see a few visualizations of what apps would look like, but essentially the idea is that with MCP Apps we kind of build on top of what both MCP-UI did and OpenAI did with Apps SDK alongside Anthropic, and kind of bring the best of it. So if we look at the main differences, then there are a few stuff, but overall like very similar concepts. As far as actually working at it, then we have the proposal itself, which is getting a lot of different comments, and we are constantly changing the spec according to the comments here. So obviously, anyone that's interested in contributing can go here and comment. But we do have the Xapps SDK, which is essentially where you can find the official kind of server SDK, and also kind of the way that you develop apps. And you have MCP-UI, which is...
If you scroll down in the README, it shows the separate packages. So you can see there's from, like, if you're an app or you're a host, because this is like I care about, because like I care about the host one, because when I saw what they did, what OpenAI did for the how they did the kind of the iframe hosting and stuff like that, it's great, it's secure, it's good, but I didn't want to implement it. It was just like, wow, that's a lot of work. So it's really nice to have a standard package out there that implements this, because you just don't want to get the security wrong. There's so many tricky things with the CSP and all that stuff, and it's so complicated. But it's nice to have this available.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because Xapps specifically is more about the server side. It doesn't actually implement the host side. I mean, there are like basic examples, but it's not the host side.
Oh, so the apps bridge portion, like you haven't done the iframe,
it's from the UI side, the apps bridge.
Yeah, the apps bridge from the UI side. Like when you have let's say pull calls and stuff like that are going through the
still do have to shoot. Okay. Well, hopefully
so
that too.
Yeah, so the client SDK would still be, kind of semi-unofficial client SDK would still be in MCP-UI.
Okay, but MCP, but there still is a community maintained, because you guys were working on that in MCP-UI. I saw the guy from
Olivier from so it's really cool. Like Olivier from Anthropic already had like initial pull request to contribute like an MCP apps renderer to MCP-UI. And we have Ruben from Postman, and we have Andrew from Goose, and the guys from MCP Jam. We're kind of contributing to make sure that we have the best possible client SDK that we can have. Because it's important to remember that Anthropic and ChatGPT OpenAI have the advantage of being the host, so they don't need to MCP doesn't necessarily need to create a client SDK. But the community does. So that's where MCP-UI as a community project really comes in and enables that.
Oh, that's a good point. So MCP-UI as a community project will still exist, because it's going to be like a further implementation of the specification beyond kind of some of the shared core libraries.
Yeah, so I mean, the Xapps will probably, as far as the bridge goes and probably some of the server stuff, the official implementation will still be there. The MCP-UI will offer some stuff probably on top of it, obviously all compliant, but on top of it. And the host SDK would still be MCP-UI, because it's not something that will officially be maintained by MCP.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Sorry, I'm a little lost, as always. So what does that mean, actually? So MCP-UI is what developers who are trying to build interfaces and actually build user experiences, they're going to use MCP-UI still. And the MCP apps will be sort of implemented by the client side. Is that what's happening? So the client side will implement, and MCP-UI will like kind of adhere to the spec. Is that?
Let's first separate the spec from the SDKs. I think it will make more sense. So MCP apps is the spec of how to build the server, how to build the UI, and how to build the host. That's all in the MCP app spec. That lives in the Xapps repo, and it's going to be formalized, ratified in the coming days. So that's the spec side. That's called the MCP apps. And now you have the SDKs. I mean, everybody can build an SDK, right? But you have the SDKs that live inside the Xapps repo, which are the server SDK, and what's going to be the UI SDK, the app bridge. So if you want to build the UI or to build the server, those are SDKs that you can use. And you have MCP-UI, which is going to focus on the client SDK, on the host SDK. So if you think about it, like Ido said, OpenAI and Anthropic, they don't need the MCP-UI SDK because they're the hosts. They're going to implement it themselves. But Darren and I don't know anyone else who wants to consume MCP-UI apps, like MCP apps, it's the easiest way of just taking the MCP-UI package, the client SDK, and just put it like the same way it was until now with MCP-UI. Just put it and it works. And
because it's like there's if you're creating an MCP app, you can go directly to ext apps and use those SDKs. But in terms of like showing it and rendering it, it's kind of like you need a browser like Chrome or something. Somebody has to implement that thing that shows it. Anthropic and OpenAI are most likely going to do their own thing, but the community implementation of that is MCP-UI.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
So
MCP-UI
will be used by client implementers or by anyone like Block or that's doing Goose or anyone else who might want to take a standard implementation of the spec. They can leverage MCP-UI.
Yeah. So it's like for us. So like I built Nanobot, so that's just a chat client host, MCP host. And for me to support MCP-UI was actually a relatively straightforward thing. I just pulled in the MCP-UI packages. It does all the rendering, and I just had to wire up, on this event handler, call this thing or whatever. So I can just pick that up. So I've been kind of, now that all this is going on, because I was like, I wasn't sure what to do with apps and everything. But like now that it's like, oh, cool. I'm just going to wait just a little bit until this, settles, and then just pull that all in, and then hopefully just kind of have support for all of this. Yeah.
By the way, like a shout out to Anthropic here, because if you think about it, if you go back to the days of ChatGPT released Apps SDK and there's MCP-UI, it would have been easy for Anthropic to say, yeah, we're going to do something like a third thing, and then you'll have like a bigger fragmentation. But this like joining forces and saying, we're going to agree on a spec. The implementation themselves might be fragmented in a way that Claude will implement the client side in one way, and OpenAI will implement it in a different way, and then you'll have the MCP-UI client implementation. But they're all going to implement the spec, right? So I think it's a good solution for that. Yeah,
it's nice to see these kind of big, huge companies that they are committed to keeping things as open as possible. They still. It's neither of them are overtly acting like evil, let's all lock it up to myself or whatever, that they both see value in the collaboration and getting as many people as possible.
At this moment too, given their positions and the sort of rising tide equals more growth for, I think it's good business as well as good open source, cred. So I'm so glad this happened, because if either of them had been more Apple-ish and decided they wanted to kind of close the world off to their little universe, I think OpenAI could have made an argument internally. There might have even been people making this argument that we're the leaders. We don't need to, let's close it off and we'll have the best apps. And I think that obviously, that would have been very detrimental to the community in the long run, and probably to them as well. So good decision, and definitely tip of the cap to them for getting it right. Okay, so how much is MCP-UI having to change to meet the new MCP Apps spec? Are you guys having to do quite a bit of modification, or is the reality that they're very similar and there's actually not that much work to refactor MCP-UI to meet the new spec?
So there are a few things that change. So for example, I think one of the biggest selling points of what made MCP-UI easy to adopt was the idea that resources are just returned as part of the tool. So it's very easy to just take that response, render it, and you're done. Probably implementing something with a client SDK would take you like 15 minutes. Now it's a little bit more tricky because you have to actually pull it to a separate resource, and that has reasons. For if you take OpenAI or Anthropic or any other big company that wants to develop a host, they would need to have like a stricter process of vetting applications that Goose doesn't need or can't even have. This is an example. So that's like one thing, and obviously it has some benefits, like you can pre-fetch stuff, you can can cache it, and there's obviously a lot of performance benefits to it. That's probably like the biggest change, which we're actually planning to do even before MCP Apps became a thing. Other than that, the communication mechanism, which is probably like the second biggest part, is largely very similar. Like a lot of different stuff, like the tool calls and notifications and prompts are all still there, obviously under different names. The idea there was basically to take the custom transport that both MCP-UI has and Apps SDK, and kind of standardize it into something that is more similar to MCP itself. So now the messages aren't custom; it's just an RPC. Where we can, it's actually the same call as it is in like the same primitive as it is in MCP. And the idea there is that theoretically you can just take, well, even in practice in some cases, you can just take the MCP SDK as is and use it to communicate between your app and the host. So I think those are probably the two biggest things. Like I had to write the adapter between MCP-UI and MCP apps. It's actually already active. Like if you have like an existing MCP-UI app, you just need to have like a adapter is MCP apps true, and it works on MCP apps as is. So it's not a huge thing to do, but obviously there are some stuff that clients would need to do to make it work.
Are you guys gonna like fairly quickly like deprecate and remove kind of the older behaviors, or what do you think in terms of like keeping that around?
Yeah.
So the idea is definitely like we started with like an adapter,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea is definitely to move to MCP apps as kind of the standard that we're working with.
Yeah, there are a few servers. I mean, as we said, the client side is going to remain MCP-UI, so that's, I mean, just upgrade the version and it's going to work. And there are a few servers that are already using MCP-UI, which will need to migrate to MCP apps. Right now, they can do it with the adapter, or we can provide a very easy migration path, like Shopify or Hugging Face. But yeah, it's not going to be a huge thing. In one other thing that we're currently discussing in MCP apps, which was not solved, but we handled it in MCP-UI, is how the host can send messages to the UI. So in MCP-UI, it was directly messaging the UI. Like if you want to send data into the UI, then the host could just post message into the UI. But in MCP apps, we're going to do something much more structured and handle the entire state in like more holistic way, and not just random messages going in and out or unstructured data.
Yeah, I don't care at all about backwards compatibility. I like to just rip out the old stuff as much as possible and just move to the new thing. Just don't keep compatibility; it's too early.
I'll just say that this was the place where the feedback from the community that we got in the 6 months that happened between the release of MCP-UI to MCP apps, it was very valuable, because we didn't just had to invent something without users. We had feedback from providers, we had feedback from hosts, we knew what is going to work, what's not going to work, what's missing. So that was super valuable, and I think it's really interesting to see, if you think about like the MCP-UI story, it's interesting to see the things happen like along the way that made it possible to release the spec. Like we probably minimized the 2 months of discussions into 2 weeks just because we had a lot of context beforehand.
Sorry, Diane, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I really like the approach of because the spec kind of constrained things quite a bit. You can't do like dynamic responses and stuff. But I know like when I was trying to implement and try out different things, it's like when you get too fancy with all this dynamic stuff, it started getting very, very complicated. And like when you looked holistically on how to build a whole MCP server, and we deal with a lot of enterprise that's like behind firewalls and all this other stuff and all these other security things, where it's like, that's why I really appreciated the OpenAI method, where it's like it's a lot more constricted, but it's kind of very obvious secure channels. And so it's like you can build a full application that technically doesn't even expose the MCP server publicly on the internet, and you can go completely through back channel, which is really nice. It kind of limits the style and how you write the application. Most people, a lot of the fancy demos that people are doing, like playing Doom and stuff, obviously are going out to the internet and doing things. But like, but if you care very much about that kind of security, like there's a very like pre-authenticated channel, and so it's very nice to be able to go back through that, because that was one of the big challenges. We talked about quite a bit, was like, how do I tie together the public session with the backend session using OAuth and all this stuff, and it just got so complicated.
Yeah, as you guys think about that, I mean, I'm curious, the Darren, you kind of mentioned the iframe and security approach that's all in MCP apps. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about that, just to to a newbie audience like me? Like, what is what are the decisions that you have to make as an MCP app builder, and what are the decisions you have to make as an MCP client side? And it feels like most of it's the client side that has to implement this, but maybe some of it's on the app builder.
So I mean, for me, from like the kind of the difference that is MCP-UI had two approaches. You could basically, from the MCP server, you could return like raw HTML, or I mean, there's really three approaches. You could return raw HTML, or just like a URL to something else. And the URL to something else was kind of like the easiest one, because it's like, oh, here's this other thing, which is a website, and I can develop it however the heck I want. I can do whatever I want, and you could just basically, it's like the world is your oyster. So a lot of times we just do that, and like, so that was super easy. But the problem is like, that's kind of insecure. You're just embedding some random URL onto your website, and you don't really know what that is. So the MCP apps approach is you have to have this kind of static template. It's a resource that's ahead of time, where it's this kind of static HTML that the host can pull in. They can host it on their own server that they run, and then they just take the tool call result and give it as data to that, and then it renders. So it's like so they basically take this HTML and put it into a sandbox that's very secure about what it's allowed to do. It's not allowed to access anything unless you explicitly say which domains it can access or whatever. So it's in this like very secure sandbox, and then they just put the data into there. And so they kind of like can pre-fetch it and pre-render it and analyze it and stuff, whatever. So it's a lot more kind of static. But there's still basically avenues towards get back to kind of the full dynamic thing. So you can still, it's like just a little bit different approach. So you do have to kind of look at this, like it tends to work really well with more like SPA type applications, which are, kind of fully rendered, already all there. And then you just pipe in some data, which I like SPAs in general. So, but yeah. That might have gone too technical for you, Shannon.
No, actually, I think I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, you're right. I think the approach of using raw HTML, I mean, if you take MCP-UI, so MCP-UI, like I said, supported multiple types. So the first one was raw HTML, which is, works the same way as Apps SDK. I would just take an HTML, put it in a sandbox, and you run it. The external URL one, like I said, it's an external website, but it's not necessarily less secure. Like they're both sandboxed in the same way. Like the part that is maybe not desirable is that the server can change it. So ChatGPT can't vet it. They can't say that this component is okay because tomorrow it can be something else. I think that's like the biggest reason why you would need to have like this kind of, well, there are others. I mean, you can list a bunch of other reasons why you don't want external URL, but that's probably the biggest one. I think that, sandboxing in general and kind of what capabilities the sandbox allows is a big topic at the moment. I think that's the number one topic brought up when people discuss the proposal, because a sandbox, like you can say, okay, a sandbox, I only allow scripts and I only allow, cookies, whatever. But some people would want access to the camera. They want access to microphone. They would want to rewrite like the base URL. They want to do like a bunch of stuff. Some would even want to, embed their own iframe within the app. So there are different use cases, and I think we need to understand like how to allow this kind of capability negotiation that would make this possible. Because you can't expect ChatGPT and Goose and Postman to all agree on the same CSP. So that's actually, and that's also like an open call to everyone watching it. If you have any opinions on it, then obviously we'd love to hear them, because there's no clear way how to do sandboxing for everyone.
That's actually touches a really interesting point in building the spec. If you look at it, then if OpenAI is building a spec for them, for ChatGPT, then obviously they know what they want security-wise. They know what the limitation they want. They probably, as the host, they want to make it as limited as possible, and then maybe relax it a little bit. And Claude is the same. Whoever is building a spec for itself, but when you're trying to build a spec like we did in MCP-UI, you try to build a spec for everyone, then you have to balance the security between security and ease of use and make it as flexible as possible, because you wouldn't know, like Ido said, Goose might want to allow a microphone and Postman might not. So it's really interesting to try to build a spec that serves all of these requirements.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mentioned, because I kind of like this approach where it's kind of, we start with kind of like zero trust and keep adding it, because I mean, one of the fundamental issues is the fact that the UI is embedded in that host. And so the only thing users understand in terms of security is what that URL is. So the UI is there. They think it somehow, as much as you want to put disclaimers everywhere, people are still going to think, oh, I can trust it because it's from open, chatgpt.com. So, I imagine it's going to end up just being kind of like the same thing we've done with phones or whatever, where there's a lot of different permissions. It's, do you want to give this thing access to you? And then you have to very much inform the user of what's going on and everything. So it's going to take some time, but I appreciate kind of because I've struggled with this of like, it's like, oh, if I just say like the external URL, it's like, well, it's just a web app. It's like, it's kind of, it's like, there's kind of nothing different about that, where it's like, I kind of do appreciate the fact that, like, if you're going to write an MCP app, like, this is actually something kind of new, like, because it's like, it's the same thing as like, if you write a mobile app, even though it's still the same technologies, there's new consideration. That's why React, there's different controls and dialogues and permissions and stuff. So it's like, I do like that we're starting from this kind of more restricted base of like, look, we're actually trying to go towards a very specific use case, not just like, it's just any random web technology in a little square on the screen. So it's like it has some constriction of what this domain really means in terms. Because I kind of also appreciate the idea that it's like mostly oriented toward tool call rendering, which at first I didn't really like, but it's like, oh, it kind of makes sense, like, because it is like the general, and it's a good starting point of, yeah.
It's even if you think about it, it's even deeper than that. Sorry, it's even deeper than that, because it's a completely new data flow. So it's not even the UI. It's not recommended in MCP apps that it will talk to its backend directly. But the best thing would be to speak to the backend through the host. So you send a message to the host. The host calls the tool, then returns the data. And that's like you need to make a switch. It's not just a web app running in, like you said, running inside ChatGPT or Claude. It's a completely new way of building user flows.
And I like that, because like with MCP-UI, I figured out that pattern, because I'm like, oh, if I go this way, it's an already authenticated channel. So I'm kind of like, I want people to do that, but it's like, me personally, it's like, I couldn't, like, the fact that you could do anything in MCP-UI, it's like, obviously I'm not going to be able to convince people. It's like, no, do this pattern, So it's like the fact that it's restricted down and, like they kind of close those doors of like, no, this is the way to go. I actually appreciate that. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting in terms of security and stuff like that, because there's a bunch of other little issues of like, what if I wanted to load a PDF or something like that? Like, the protocol is not very efficient for large binary content and things like that. So there's going to be some weird issues we'll run into. But I very much I appreciate the kind of the fact that it's very restricted.
So one quick question before we wrap, guys. I know we're kind of way over time, but if you were making like a pitch for this to a developer, like, okay, now's the time, right? You work at Target, go build an awesome Target app, right? You work at Amex, go build an awesome Amex app for your users. And these apps are going to be able to go with, you're just going to build it once. It's going to be like a web app. You're not going to have to build it for every client. What's the pitch? Like, what is now the time? Are we ready? Or should people wait? Or is it still evolving too much? Or is it now like go Vercel, build an awesome MCP app that anybody can interface with through Claude Code? Like, what's your thinking?
I think it's definitely the latter. I think the main thing to understand is that the web is changing. We're facing something new. A lot of web apps or SaaS apps are kind of in a position right now where they're not sure where they're going. Like, are users going to visit their dashboard and do everything from there, or are we going to a new web where people will work in a chat and they would ask what's going on today, and they would get like bits and pieces of different applications and kind of get that workflow through there. That's probably the best time to bet on this technology, to kind of see how can you be part of this new web, how can you maintain your identity and user experience in this new age of chatbots, I guess. So I wouldn't wait if I were building at the moment.
And it's also a very optimistic outlook because you don't have to throw away all the knowledge that we have about building UIs. Granted, these are different UIs, but people will still need this last mile of user interaction. And the thing is that if we thought that host will be able to generate them on the fly, then yeah, maybe for some of them it can generate on the fly according to data, but a lot of the hosts, they don't have the capabilities of maybe ChatGPT, and there are so many, there are like hundreds of user flows, like the long tail of user flows that are not going to be generated in a good or consistent way. Like we always we give the example of booking a seat in a venue, or things that are very like specific, and you have companies that they are the domain experts of how to do it. They a decade of knowledge of like Ticketmaster. They have a decade of knowledge of how to do that, and so that can be a win-win situation for the developers of that company to build this kind of third-party chat experience. Yeah,
I mean, I 100% think it's going to happen where you're going to end up with companies, some companies that will come that will actually just be 100%, MCP. It's like, it's the same thing if there's, people, just start with mobile and they created just a mobile app and they, and then eventually they had a website. It's like, it's still a little early, but the stuff is moving so fast. It's like, it's just amazing because you can look at these kind of like predictions where you're like, oh, in a couple of years this could happen, but it's just amazing that how quickly it's evolving. That so I could imagine that there's going to be companies that basically just spawn that are just doing apps. So it's like this is the new channel.
That's why we wanted to standardize it from the beginning. It was super important for us. Yeah.
How much are you going to have to redo Nanobot to kind of support this new approach? Is this a big lift for you, or relatively nothing?
No, it's like they're doing all the hard work for me. Yeah, it's not. Yeah. So it's like I'm just because the community is doing so much. This is like the nice thing or whatever, and so it's not like supporting MCP. So Nanobot, I think we support pretty much all the features of MCP-UI. And I was always surprised that other hosts didn't do it because it wasn't very hard to support all the features. But yeah, so it should be relatively easy, because I thought I was gonna have to implement it all myself. Once Open Chat Apps SDK came out, then I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta go, and I just didn't want to do that, so I kind of dragged my feet. But now this is all kind of gone back to a community effort again. Then it's like, oh, the community, so I'm excited to see all this. I don't think it's gonna be very difficult to pick it up. And I think, but that's kind of the exciting thing is that somebody can actually write an app that's gonna work on these different platforms, and it's like when you start looking at it's like I put a lot of effort into talking about kind of agents as MCP servers, and I think nobody really seems to get that. But if you kind of tweak it slightly and say agentic tools, then people get it. So it's like your tool, it's like you can have this whole cool AI, you can do anything behind a tool, you can do all this stuff, whatever. And so the fact that even you're plugging, if you write your app and you're like, no, it's 100% tied to let's say it's going to be all tied to ChatGPT because that's the ChatGPT model. It's like that's not really the case. It's just one call. You can still do all the fancy stuff you want. There's still all the AI you can do yourself, all the different you could. So it's like the binding is actually fairly portable at the kind of the level of abstraction that we're talking about. That I think writing apps that are going to work on ChatGPT versus Claude versus whatever is not going to be more significantly different than, let's say, Mozilla or Netscape and Internet Explorer. It's like, yes, you got to test, you got to try things or whatever, but it's not impossible. So I think there's just going to be a huge, a possibility for these apps.
Awesome.
So,
Well, guys, I want to thank you again for coming on and staying up late with us back in Israel. I hope we'll see a pitch or some kind of a paper from you guys that we can present in New York, and looking forward to having you on the stage there and maybe showing where this is all at in 3 to 4 months, because the way it's moving right now, I can only imagine it'll probably be a million miles down the road. So
yeah,
congratulations, guys. Amazing work and way to foster community and connect with everyone who's working in this area and make it come together for those of us who just want to see the awesome outcomes. Great work.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be back again, like I said, on Thursday with another episode all about code interpretation in MCP. So have a great day.